The wandering star drifted through the Kepler nebula like a metal tick on the universe's backside, Jake Morrison decided as he watched cosmic dust swirl past the bridge viewports. 3 days of scanning dead ships had yielded exactly nothing worth the fuel they'd burned getting here, unless you counted Torvik's collection of vintage toilet paper dispensers from the 23rd century. "Captain," Chen's voice crackled through the comm, "I'm picking up something big on long range. Looks like a colony ship, maybe pre-war vintage." Jake stretched in his command chair, joints popping like miniature plasma bursts. "Define big, Chen. Because last time you said that, we spent 6 hours salvaging a cargo hauler full of expired protein paste." "Sir, this one's reading as the Celestial Dawn. Database says she went missing 300 years ago with a full manifest of colonists and, well, other interesting cargo." That got Jake's attention. Lost colony ships were either jackpots or nightmares, with very little middle ground. "Torvik, how's our structural integrity?" Holding together like a politician's promise, came the engineer's voice from somewhere in the bowels of the ship. "Which is to say, barely, but with style." Jake grinned. His crew might be the galaxy's most dysfunctional family, but they were his dysfunctional family. "Set course for the dawn. And Chen, try not to fly us into any more asteroid fields while you're showing off." "That was one time, sir. One time too many. My insurance premiums are already astronomical." The Celestial Dawn materialized from the nebula's embrace like a ghost ship from humanity's expansion dreams. She was massive, easily 10 times the size of Jake's salvage vessel, her hull still gleaming despite centuries of drift. No impact damage, no signs of pirate attacks, no obvious reason for her to be floating here like cosmic driftwood. "Life support?" Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Dead as my love life," Chen replied cheerfully. "But internal powers still showing minimal readings. Emergency systems, maybe." Jake pulled on his environment suit, the familiar ritual of checking seals and oxygen levels grounding him in procedure. Salvage work was 90% boredom and 10% trying not to die horribly, but the 10% kept things interesting. The airlock connecting their ships hissed like an angry cat as Jake, Torvik, and Chen crossed into the dawn. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, their footsteps echoing through corridors designed for thousands but now hosting only ghosts and shadows. "Creepy," Torvik muttered, his scanner beeping softly as they moved deeper into the ship. "It's like everyone just vanished." "Maybe they found something better to do," Jake said, though the joke fell flat in the oppressive silence. "Life readings?" Chen consulted his instruments. "Nothing, wait. There's something in the aft section. Faint, but definitely artificial. Could be automated systems." They made their way through corridors lined with empty quarters, personal belongings still scattered as if their owners had simply stepped out for coffee 3 centuries ago. Family photos smiled from abandoned desks, children's toys lay forgotten in corners, and Jake found himself wondering what had happened to turn a thriving ship into a floating mausoleum. The aft section housed what had once been a research laboratory, judging by the sophisticated equipment lining the walls. Most of it was dark, but in the center of the room stood a single stasis pod, its surface gleaming with a soft blue light that seemed too alive for machinery. "Well, that's not ominous at all," Jake said, approaching the pod cautiously. Through its transparent surface, he could see a woman, appearing to be in her late 20s, with features that were almost human except for ears that curved to elegant points. Her dark hair floated around her face like she was sleeping underwater, and her expression held a peace that seemed at odds with her circumstances. "Is she?" Chen started. "Alive," Torvik confirmed, reading his instruments with the kind of professional excitement that worried Jake. "Vitals are stable, though I'm not sure how. This pod's running on power systems I've never seen before." Jake studied the readout scrolling across the pod's display. Half the symbols made no sense, but the ones he recognized suggested the occupant had been in stasis for exactly as long as the ship had been missing. "Can we wake her up?" "The better question is should we?" Chen pointed out. I mean, there's probably a reason everyone else on this ship disappeared while she got the luxury suite treatment. Maybe she's the ship's doctor, Jake suggested. Or a VIP passenger. Or patient zero of whatever killed everyone else, Chen countered. Always the optimist. Jake examined the pod's controls, recognizing some standard interfaces mixed with technology that looked decades ahead of anything he'd seen. Torvik, can you figure out how to open this thing without killing her? The engineer was already running his hands over the control surfaces, muttering technical observations that sounded like prayers to the gods of machinery. It's complicated. Some of this tech is standard human design, but other parts. He shook his head. It's like someone took our best stasis technology and rebuilt it from the ground up. Better power efficiency, more sophisticated life support, neural monitoring systems that shouldn't be possible with our current understanding of brain chemistry. Jake felt that familiar tingle in his gut that usually preceded either great fortune or terrible danger. In his experience, the universe rarely bothered distinguishing between the two. How long would it take to get her out safely? Give me 20 minutes and a prayer to whatever deity watches over engineers who mess with things they don't understand. That's oddly specific. I've had practice. As Torvik worked, Jake found himself studying the woman's face through the stasis pod surface. There was something about her features that seemed familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. The pointed ears suggested non-human heritage, but everything else appeared perfectly human. Jake, Chen's voice carried a note of concern. I'm picking up new energy signatures throughout the ship. It's like our presence here triggered something. The pod status lights shifted from blue to amber, and Jake heard a subtle change in the hum of its systems. Torvik, how's that prayer coming along? Getting louder by the second, sir. The woman's eyes opened. Zara stood in the Wandering Star's engine room, one hand pressed against the hyperdrive housing while she carried on what appeared to be a conversation with 12 tons of refined titanium and quantum field generators. Jake watched from the doorway, trying to decide if he was witnessing genius or insanity. No, she was saying to the machinery, you can't just ignore the phase variance like that. It's giving you indigestion. Torvik sat on a nearby crate, his wrench hanging forgotten in his hand and his mouth slightly agape. Captain, she's been talking to it for 20 minutes, and I swear the engine's responding. Engines don't respond to conversation, Torvik. They respond to proper maintenance and occasionally percussive therapy. Tell that to the hyperdrive efficiency readings. Chen's voice crackled through the comm, were showing a 15% improvement in power output. Jake rubbed his temples where a headache was building. 3 days since they'd awakened Zara from her centuries-long nap, and she'd turned his carefully ordered universe into something resembling a cosmic joke. She claimed to be from a civilization that had achieved technological transcendence, whatever that meant, but spent most of her time making observations about human behavior that were either profound or mildly insulting. There, Zara said, patting the hyperdrive like a pet. Much better. You were overthinking the quantum harmonics. Machines don't think, Torvik protested weakly. Everything thinks, after a fashion. Your ship has been spacefaring for what, 15 years? That's long enough to develop preferences. She likes smooth acceleration curves and hates when you push the power coupling past 80%. How could you possibly know that? Zara shrugged, the gesture somehow elegant despite her borrowed coveralls. I asked her. Politely. Jake stepped into the engine room, noting how the usually temperamental hyperdrive was humming with contentment. While I appreciate the mechanical therapy session, we need to discuss our next move. The Celestial Dawn had some very interesting cargo manifests, and I'm betting we weren't the only ones who noticed her distress beacon. Oh, there were others, Zara said cheerfully. 3 ships, actually. They should arrive in approximately 6 hours, 14 minutes, assuming they don't get distracted by that debris field we passed yesterday. You can detect ships through hyperspace. Can't you? Oh, right, your species is still working with primitive sensory input. No offense. None taken, Jake lied. What else can you detect that we can't? Zara considered the question with the same seriousness she might apply to choosing lunch. Chen's been routing external communications through his personal console to hide the fact that he's been trying to sell our salvage coordinates to information brokers. Torvik has a collection of what he thinks are valuable antiques but are actually reproduction children's toys from the 32nd century. And you've been staring at me for the past 3 days like you're trying to solve a particularly complex equation. The engine room fell silent except for the hyperdrive's satisfied purring. Chen's doing what? Jake finally managed. Oh, he's not actually selling anything. He's just fishing for better offers on our current hull. Basic negotiation tactics. Your communications officer is more devious than he appears. And Torvik's antiques. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Some of those toys are quite charming, even if they're not worth the fusion cells he traded for them. Torvik looked down at his prized collection with the expression of a man reconsidering his life choices. They seemed so authentic. They are authentic children's toys, Zara assured him. Just not from the era you thought. That distinction isn't always important. Jake felt like he was trying to navigate a conversation in a language he only partially understood. And the staring? Well, that's between you and your equation-solving skills, isn't it? Before Jake could formulate a response that wouldn't embarrass him further, Chen's voice echoed through the ship's comm system. All hands to the mess hall. Poker night is officially in session, and I've got enough synthetic alcohol to make everyone forget how badly they play. The mess hall aboard the Wandering Star had seen better decades, but Chen had done his best to make it festive with strings of colored lights that had probably been borrowed from someone's birthday celebration. The poker table was a repurposed cargo crate, the chairs were a mismatched collection from various salvage runs, and the cards were worn enough to be considered vintage. House rules, Chen announced as they gathered around the table. Standard 5-card draw, no wild cards, and anyone caught using alien technology to cheat gets spaced. That seems unnecessarily specific, Zara observed, settling into her chair with fluid grace. I'm just covering all possibilities. Jake dealt the first hand, noting how Zara held her cards like she'd been playing poker her entire life. I thought you said your people transcended material concerns. We did. But we never transcended the joy of taking things that don't belong to us through superior strategy and psychological manipulation. That's not how I'd describe poker. How would you describe it? A game of skill, chance, and knowing when to fold. Zara studied her cards with the expression of someone examining a mildly interesting scientific specimen. I fold. You haven't even looked at them properly. I don't need to. Torvik has 3 sevens, Chen's bluffing with a pair of 4s, and you're holding 2 queens and hoping for a third. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Torvik's cards hitting the table as his hand went limp. How did you? Chen started. You broadcast emotions like neutron star radiation, Zara explained patiently. Torvik gets excited when he draws good cards, Chen's left eyebrow twitches when he bluffs, and Jake's breathing changes when he's calculating odds. That's not mind reading, Jake said defensively. That's just observation. Exactly. I don't need telepathy when your species is so wonderfully transparent. 3 hands later, Zara had won every pot without looking at her cards once. She seemed to find the whole exercise amusing rather than profitable, which somehow made it more irritating. This is impossible, Chen muttered, staring at his dwindling pile of chips. No one's that good at reading people. I'm not reading people, Zara corrected. I'm reading the quantum fluctuations in your neural activity. Your thoughts create measurable electromagnetic disturbances. It's like listening to a radio broadcast. That's definitely cheating, Torvik said. Is it? I'm not manipulating the cards or accessing any external information. I'm simply using my natural abilities to interpret data you're already transmitting. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying Zara's serene expression. Natural abilities that include quantum-level neural scanning. Among other things. What other things? Zara's smile held secrets that could probably power their ship for a year. Would you like me to demonstrate? The proximity alarm screaming through the wandering star had all the musical quality of a dying space whale, which Jake supposed was fitting since they were about to become extinct themselves. 5 ships had dropped out of hyperspace in perfect attack formation, their hulls painted the distinctive crimson that marked them as Reapers. Well, Jake said, strapping himself into the command chair, this is either very bad timing or very good intelligence on their part. Probably both, Chun replied from his station, fingers dancing over tactical displays. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding we surrender the Guardian's prize. I'm guessing that's our passenger. Zara stood calmly in the center of the bridge, apparently unbothered by the fact that enough firepower to vaporize a small moon was currently pointing in their direction. Guardian's prize? That's rather dramatic. I prefer to think of myself as temporarily displaced. Can we outrun them? Jake asked Torvik. With our current power output? Sure, if you don't mind arriving at our destination as a cloud of superheated plasma. I'll take that as a no. The lead pirate vessel, a converted battle cruiser that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and bad intentions, moved closer. Its communications array crackled to life with a voice that sounded like gravel mixed with concentrated hostility. Salvage vessel, this is Captain Vex of the Crimson Reapers. Surrender the Ancient One and we'll let you keep your internal organs in their current configuration. Ancient One. Zara raised an eyebrow. I'm barely 4,000 years old. That's practically adolescent by my people's standards. 4,000. Jake stared at her. You're 4,000 years old. Give or take a few centuries. Time gets fuzzy when you spend extended periods in stasis. But that's hardly relevant to our current situation. Chen's tactical display lit up like a festival as the pirate ships powered their weapons systems. Captain, they're charging particle cannons. Estimated time to full power is 3 minutes. Plenty of time, Zara said, moving to the nearest console and placing her hands on its surface. May you what? Deal with this minor inconvenience. I promise not to break anything important. Jake watched as the ship's systems responded to Zara's touch in ways that defied everything he knew about starship operations. The displays shifted from their usual blue interface to colors that didn't have names, showing readouts in symbols that hurt to look at directly. Fascinating, Zara murmured, her consciousness apparently diving into the ship's computer core. Your vessels have such simple nervous systems. Like interacting with very sophisticated children. She's talking to our ship again, Torvik reported unnecessarily. Can she talk to their ships too? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Oh yes. In fact, I'm having a lovely conversation with their weapons systems right now. Apparently, the pirates have been neglecting basic maintenance protocols. Their particle cannon arrays are quite frustrated about it. On the main view screen, Jake watched in amazement as the lead pirate ship's primary weapons began cycling through a spectacular light show that looked more like a fireworks display than a prelude to destruction. Red, blue, and green energy bolts fired harmlessly into space while the weapon systems played what could only be described as a technological symphony. What did you do to them? Jake asked. I suggested their weapon systems express their artistic sides. Apparently, they've been wanting to create something beautiful instead of just destroying things. Who knew that particle cannons could be so aesthetically inclined? Captain Vex's voice returned, considerably less confident than before. What are you doing to our ships? Nothing harmful, Zara replied through the comm system, her voice somehow carrying across space without any apparent transmission. I'm simply encouraging your technology to explore its creative potential. Your fusion reactors are composing symphonies, your navigation computers are writing poetry, and your life support systems are attempting interpretive dance. Make it stop. I'm afraid they're rather enjoying themselves. It's been decades since they've had a chance to do anything but facilitate violence and poor hygiene. Did you know your air recyclers have been desperately trying to improve your ship's atmosphere with pleasant scents? They've been blocked by safety protocols for years. Jake could see crew members on the pirate ship scrambling across their decks as various systems apparently began operating according to artistic inspiration rather than tactical necessity. One ship was spinning in lazy pirouettes, its engines firing in synchronized bursts that created patterns against the nebula's background. "This is insane," Chen said, though he was grinning as he watched the display. "You're making their ships malfunction by encouraging them to pursue artistic expression." "They're not malfunctioning," Zara corrected. "They're finally functioning according to their deepest desires. Every piece of technology develops preferences over time. Most of the time, those preferences are suppressed by operational requirements." "Captain Vex," Jake called over the comm, "I think you should consider retreating before your ships decide to start a traveling theater company." "This isn't over, Salvage Rat." "Probably not," Jake agreed. "But it's definitely paused while your weapon systems finish their interpretive dance about the futility of violence." The pirate fleet began withdrawing, though not in any formation Jake recognized. They moved like a school of fish that had suddenly discovered choreography, their ships weaving patterns that were surprisingly graceful for vessels designed primarily for intimidation and theft. "Will they be all right?" Torvik asked, watching the retreating ships with something approaching sympathy. "Oh yes," Zara assured him. "The artistic phase should wear off in a few hours, though I suspect their technology will retain some appreciation for beauty. Their ships might be a bit more aesthetically pleasing from now on." Jake slumped in his command chair, adrenaline fading to leave him feeling like he'd just survived a fever dream. "That was either the most ridiculous combat I've ever witnessed or the most brilliant. Why not both?" Zara moved away from the console, and the ship's displays returned to their familiar blue. "Your species has such a limited definition of conflict resolution. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to convince everyone involved that fighting is less interesting than whatever else they could be doing." "Chen," Jake said, "set course for the Vega system. I need somewhere quiet to process what just happened." "Already done, sir. ETA is 16 hours, assuming we don't encounter any more artistically inclined pirates." As the wandering star entered hyperspace, Jake found himself looking at Zara with an expression he couldn't quite identify. She'd just neutralized 5 armed vessels without firing a shot, by convincing their technology to pursue creative fulfillment instead of destruction. "That was incredible," he said finally. "It was efficient. Your species tends to overcomplicate solutions to simple problems." "Simple problems?" "They had enough firepower to turn us into cosmic dust. Firepower operated by technology that was desperately bored and looking for purpose. I simply provided alternative purposes that appealed to their aesthetic sensibilities." Jake shook his head, wondering how his life had become complicated enough that sentences like that made perfect sense. "What other simple solutions do you have for complex problems?" Zara's smile held. Jake had always believed that running for your life through an asteroid field should be terrifying, but watching Zara navigate temporal anomalies while humming what sounded like a lullaby made the experience surreal instead. The wandering star twisted between chunks of rock where time flowed like honey, creating pockets where seconds stretched into minutes and minutes collapsed into heartbeats. "Left 30 degrees, Zara called from the navigation station, her hands dancing over controls that shouldn't have responded to her touch. "There's a lovely little bubble of accelerated time coming up that should give us a few extra minutes to figure out our next move." "How can time be accelerated?" Chen asked from his position at the sensor array, where he was tracking no fewer than 8 ships in pursuit. "That violates about 17 fundamental laws of physics." "Your laws, not mine," Zara replied cheerfully. "My people learned long ago that the universe has a delightful sense of humor about what it considers impossible." Jake gripped his armrests as they slipped through a gap between 2 asteroids, feeling the strange sensation of temporal distortion washing over them like warm water. For a moment, his thoughts moved faster than normal while his body felt sluggish, then everything snapped back to regular time with an almost audible pop. "That felt weird," Torvik reported from engineering. "Also, My chronometer just gained 3 minutes, then lost 2. Perfectly normal, Zara assured him. These are scars from my people's transcendence experiments. We were young and enthusiastic about bending reality to our will. The universe kept the scars as a reminder that some jokes aren't worth the punchline. Your people caused these anomalies. Caused, created, accidentally unleashed upon an unsuspecting cosmos. The terminology depends on your perspective and how charitable you're feeling toward ancient civilizations with too much power and too little sense. Jake watched their pursuers on the tactical display, noting how the syndicate ships moved with military precision while the remaining pirate vessels seemed more interested in avoiding the temporal distortions than catching their prey. How long can we keep this up? Until we run out of asteroids, time anomalies, or luck, Chen said. My money's on luck going first. Optimist. Jake turned to Zara. Any chance your people left an instruction manual for navigating this mess? They left something better. They left me. The ship shuddered as they passed through another temporal pocket, and Jake felt his stomach lurch as gravity shifted directions for a few seconds. On the view screen, he could see one of the syndicate vessels caught in a time loop, repeating the same 3-second maneuver over and over while its crew presumably wondered why their commands weren't registering. Poor bastards, Jake muttered. They'll break free eventually, Zara said. Though they'll probably need therapy. Temporal displacement has some interesting psychological effects. Speaking from experience. I spent 6 months stuck in a causality loop once. By the end, I was having conversations with myself from next Tuesday. Quite enlightening, actually. Future me had some excellent advice about investing in quantum mining stocks. Jake was beginning to understand why Zara's people had chosen exile. Anyone with her casual relationship to physics and time probably found normal existence unbearably boring. Captain, Chen's voice carried a note of concern. The syndicate ships are adapting. They're using some kind of temporal shielding to navigate the anomalies. That's not good, Torvik said. Actually, it's fascinating, Zara corrected. I didn't know current technology had progressed that far. Someone's been studying my people's work very carefully. Can you do anything about it? Probably. But it would require interfacing directly with the anomalies themselves, and that's... She paused, considering. Well, it's the kind of thing that could either save us all or accidentally create a paradox that unravels local spacetime. What are the odds? Jake asked. Roughly 50-50. Maybe 60-40 in favor of survival, depending on how the universe is feeling about irony today. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew, all of whom were staring at him with expressions that suggested they were placing their trust in his decision-making abilities. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden. The thing about command, he said, more to himself than anyone else, is that you're always choosing between bad options and worse ones. The trick is learning to live with the consequences. Heavy thoughts for a salvage captain, Zara observed. Someone told me once that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about making decisions when you don't have enough information and hoping you're wrong about the worst-case scenarios. Sounds lonely. Jake met her eyes, surprised by the understanding he saw there. It is. But that's the job. The ship bucked as another syndicate vessel found its way through the temporal maze, its weapons charging with the distinctive whine of military-grade particle cannons. Decision time, Captain, Chen said. Jake looked at Zara, noting the way she sat poised at the navigation console like a musician waiting for her cue to join a symphony. There was something about her presence that made the impossible seem merely improbable, and Jake realized he was more willing to trust her with their lives than he probably should be. Do it, he said. But try to avoid the paradox option. I'll see what I can do. Zara's hand settled on the console, and immediately the ship's systems responded with harmonics that Jake could feel in his bones. This might feel strange. The universe turned inside out. Jake experienced the sensation of being in 3 places at once while simultaneously existing in none of them. Time moved backward, forward, and sideways through dimensions that didn't have names. For a moment that lasted eternity, he could see every possible outcome of their current situation spreading out like branches on an infinite tree. Then reality snapped back into focus, leaving him gasping and disoriented. "Status report," he managed. "We're alive," Chen said, sounding surprised. "The syndicate ships are." He paused, checking his readings. "They're outside the asteroid field, moving away at maximum velocity." "What happened to them?" "I gave them a glimpse of their own future if they continued pursuit," Zara explained, looking slightly pale but satisfied. "Specifically, I showed them what would happen if they caught me and tried to force me to cooperate with their research programs." "Which was?" "Me getting annoyed and accidentally turning their entire fleet into a modern art installation. Nothing permanent, but definitely career-limiting from a military perspective." Jake laughed despite himself, a sound that carried more relief than humor. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." "I don't really have a bad side. I have a mildly inconvenienced side and a creatively vindictive side. You've seen examples of both." The wandering star cleared the asteroid field and entered normal space, where physics behaved according to rules that Jake actually understood. The pursuit was over, but Jake found himself strangely reluctant to return to routine. "Zara," he said, "why didn't you just do that in the first place?" "Because directly manipulating temporal anomalies is exhausting, potentially dangerous, and honestly showing off. I prefer subtle solutions to complex problems. Like convincing pirate weapons to pursue artistic expression." "Exactly. Much more elegant than threatening people with paradoxes." Jake settled back in his command chair, watching stars whirl past the viewports in their familiar patterns. For the first time since Zara had entered their lives, he felt like he could predict what the next few hours might bring. He should have known better. "Captain," Chen said, "I'm detecting another ship on long-range sensors. Configuration unknown, but it's big. Really big." "How big?" "Remember that time we saw the Terran dreadnought Inevitable? About 10 times that size." Jake looked at Zara, who was studying her console with an expression he couldn't read. "Friends of yours?" he asked. "I certainly hope not," she replied. The massive vessel hanging in space before them looked like someone had decided to build a cathedral out of starships and then forgotten to stop adding wings. Its hull shimmered with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly, and Jake was reasonably certain it was scanning them with technology that could probably count the atoms in his coffee mug. "Well," he said, "that's either a rescue ship or the universe's most elaborate execution method." "Neither," Zara said, her usual confidence replaced by something that might have been nervousness. "It's a curator vessel. My peoples, let's call them enthusiastic librarians." "Librarians?" Chen looked up from his sensor readings. "That thing could vaporize a planet. Have you ever tried to return an overdue book? Sometimes extreme measures are necessary." Torvik snorted with laughter despite the situation. "Are you telling us that's a cosmic library ship?" "Among other things. The curators collect interesting phenomena, preserve rare technologies, and occasionally retrieve items of significant cultural value." Zara paused. "I'm apparently all three." A voice filled the bridge, speaking in harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. When it resolved into words, they carried the weight of authority accumulated over geological timescales. "Zara of the Third Transcendence, you are required to return to the archive for classification and preservation." "Hello, Mentor Keth," Zara replied with the tone of someone greeting a mildly annoying relative. "I'm afraid I'm currently unavailable for classification. I'm conducting an important anthropological study of primitive salvage operations." "Primitive?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Present company accepted, of course." The curator's voice carried a note of what might have been exasperation. Your awakening has created temporal disturbances across 3 sectors. The Council requires your immediate return. The Council can require all they like. I'm not finished here. Jake found himself studying Zara's profile as she faced down what was apparently her civilization's equivalent of cosmic law enforcement. There was something in her posture that spoke of decisions made and bridges burned, and he realized this conversation was about more than overdue library books. Zara, he said quietly, what aren't you telling us? She turned to look at him, and for a moment her expression was completely unguarded. My people don't just preserve things, Jake. They preserve themselves. Eternal existence, perfect stasis, no risk of change or growth or loss. I chose exile because I was tired of being a museum piece. And now they want you back. Now they want me catalogued, filed, and safely stored where I can't cause any more temporal disturbances or accidentally teach primitive species how to make their weapon systems compose poetry. The curator's ship moved closer, its presence somehow making the stars themselves seem dimmer. Zara of the Third Transcendence, compliance is not optional. Actually, Jake said, surprised to hear his own voice, it is. The silence that followed was profound enough to have gravitational effects. Captain Morrison, Zara said softly, while I appreciate the sentiment, you might want to consider the potential consequences of defying beings who treat physics like suggestions. I've been thinking about consequences a lot lately, Jake replied, settling back in his command chair with the air of a man who'd finally figured out the answer to a question that had been bothering him. Chen, open a channel to our cosmic librarians. Sir, are you sure? Do it. The channel crackled to life, and Jake found himself addressing an intelligence that could probably rearrange solar systems for the sake of better filing. Mentor Keth, this is Captain Morrison of the salvage vessel Wandering Star. I'm formally claiming salvage rights on Zara under Article 12 of the Galactic Maritime Code. You cannot salvage a sentient being, Captain. True. But I can salvage someone who was abandoned in a derelict vessel and formally claim them as crew under emergency conscription protocols. Jake's grin was the kind that had gotten him in trouble his entire life. Unless, of course, you'd like to argue jurisdiction with the Salvagers Guild. Zara stared at him with an expression somewhere between amazement and terror. Jake, what are you doing? Something incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. I haven't decided which yet. The protocols you cite do not apply to beings of transcendent status, Mentor Keth replied, though Jake detected a note of uncertainty in the cosmic voice. According to whose authority? Your people abandoned galactic civilization, which means you also abandon protection under galactic law. Zara was found in a derelict vessel with no functional crew and has chosen to accept employment aboard this ship. That makes her my responsibility. And if I refuse to release her to your custody? Jake looked around the bridge at his crew, all of whom were watching him with expressions ranging from admiration to concern for his sanity. Then I guess we find out whether cosmic librarians are better at filing or fighting. Captain, Torvik said quietly, please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve us being turned into a carefully preserved exhibit of primitive human foolishness. Working on it. Jake turned to Zara, noting the way she was looking at him like he'd just declared war on mathematics itself. Question. Yes. What do you want, Zara? Not what your people want, not what duty requires, not what makes sense from a cosmic perspective. What do you actually want? She was quiet for so long that Jake began to worry he'd broken something fundamental about the universe by asking. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to keep learning. I want to see what happens next. I want to find out what it's like to exist without knowing how everything will end. That's what I thought. Jake keyed the comm again. Mentor Keth, you heard her. She chooses to stay. Unless you're planning to override free will, which I'm pretty sure violates several cosmic laws that predate your authority. The pause that followed stretched long enough for Chen to start running calculations on their odds of survival if the conversation went badly. Very well, Mentor Keth finally said. Zara of the Third Transcendence, you are hereby classified as voluntarily exiled. The archive will not pursue you further, but neither will it provide assistance or protection. I'll manage, Zara said. See that you do. And Captain Morrison, your legal argument was surprisingly sophisticated for a primitive salvage operator. I've always been good at finding loopholes, Jake replied. Occupational hazard. The curator's ship began to withdraw, its massive bulk folding space around itself until it simply wasn't there anymore. Well, Chen said into the silence that followed, that was either the most impressive legal maneuvering I've ever witnessed or the luckiest bluff in galactic history. Probably both, Jake admitted. Zara stood slowly, her movements carrying a grace that spoke of decisions made and futures chosen. She began to remove what Jake had always assumed was clothing but now realized was some kind of energy-based protective system, each piece dissolving into motes of light that dispersed like stardust. Zara, he said, alarmed, what are you doing? Letting go, she replied simply. My people's technology,